I now invite Mr. Nilesh Jayanandana, the community lead of Kubernetes Sri Lanka and a Google Cloud certified professional cloud architect, to give his address on the topic of component communications in Angular.
I'm here to talk about communication between Angular components, which is a pretty basic topic. So a little bit about me. I'm a software architect at a company called Platform Cloud. Sure that none of you have heard about it before. It's a Google partner company in Australia where we are building a cloud on top of Kubernetes. And our front end is built on Angular, and I'm one of the architects who's architecting that. So yeah, that's something about me. And then you could find me at my Twitter handle and Medium handle. Although my articles are mostly about Kubernetes, but there are a few Angular stuff there as well. Yeah. All right. So talking about the agenda, I'm going to give an introduction to components because we are talking about components here, and then we are going to see what are the relationships that we have with components, and then what are the methods of communication we can do with these components as per my title of the speech. And finally, I'm planning to do a hands-on demo, but let's see how it goes. All right, so what is an Angular component? Can any of you, not the front row speakers, but can any of the students or other people can actually answer this question? What is an Angular component? I mean, if you answer one, I'll give you a t-shirt after this presentation. I bought a few, so I can give you one. Yeah, okay. All right, so component is the basic building block of an Angular UI. So probably in the earlier session, they talked about, you guys talked about elements as well. So when you talk about components, a component has a template, which is HTML, a style, a metadata, and the logic, the functionality or the logic of the component, which is binded to the template. So it's binded through property binding and event binding. It's two-way binded. And talking about directives, the difference between components and directives is that directives don't have a template, and it just has a logic and it just manipulates wherever it is inserted to. So that's the difference. And so basically a component encapsulates a UI block where the functionality and everything is just there. I think in a previous example, previous talk, one speaker showed the find my fare date picker. That is a component. That would be a component, a single isolated functionality. All right. So here's a very basic example of how components are. If you take this wireframe, it has a header, it has a banner, it has slider, cards, and a footer. So the entire application, it would be one component app. That's where the root component is. That's where you start. And then inside that, you have multiple components. You have a header component, you have a banner component, slider component, cards, and footer. And then inside the slider, there are smaller components which are inside the slider, which I have called slide item. So that's how the component tree happens in Angular. So talking about relationships, there are three relationships. One is parent-child, direct communication. And then there are siblings, where two children in one parent component, and parent to grandchild or nth child, where they want to talk to below. Yeah. So when talking with these components, so coming from an Angular JS background, remember if you want to transition data between these components, you would probably use $root scope or $scope. I mean that was the pretty easiest way to go for Angular JS developers. But with Angular 2, they changed the scenario where they wanted either the data was going upwards or downwards. It's directional. That's it. There was no other way. That's how Angular 2 was designed. So this is the native way when it comes to angular communication between components. So basically, parent to child, it's pretty easy. It's either you go down uh, or you go up. The parent can talk directly to the child, or child can talk directly, uh, emit events to the parent. So to do this, there are a couple of ways you can do. First one is you could bind a variable from parent to the child, and then the child can actually access that variable. And if child wants to send something to the parent, it has to emit an event where parent would catch that event and can do some work on top of it. And there's another thing you can do where parent wants to invoke a method or something of the child. That is, you use the view child, or you pass the reference of the child to some other function. Then you are able to do callbacks in the parent component, directly call functions in the child component. So that's how parent and child component works. So this is the basic way of communicating in Angular components. So now we comes to grandchild, parent and grandchild. So looking at the previous method of communication, if a grandchild wants to communicate to the parent, then it has to go through the child component. Ideally, if you want to talk to your grandmother or grandfather, you don't directly talk to them, you would go through your father or mother. So something like that. That's the way, the native way. If you want to do your communication in Angular, that's how you have to do it. So the second one is sibling. So when I'm talking about this, a funny thing that comes to mind. My girlfriend has a sister, and for about a couple of years now, they have been pretty mad with each other. They don't talk to each other anymore. So whenever they want to communicate with each other, they tell the whatever they want to tell to their mother, and their mother would act as a mediator, and then pass the message to the other person. Same way with Angular. If a sibling component wants to talk with each other, they have to go through the parent. Otherwise, you can't do that. That's how Angular is done. And my girlfriend is here, and probably I'm gonna get an earful today in the evening after this call. But yeah, I had to say that. All right. So these are the primary or basic methods of you have to communicate with components. Now here's the problem. So when you have this many components, this much of a hierarchy, imagine child AAA wants to talk to parent. That means that you have to proxy through uh, quadruple A, sorry, child quadruple A, triple A, double A, A. Right, it's going to be a huge hop, right? You have to write code on each and every component to facilitate this. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a messy code. So this is the problem. So like if you have notification component or something, and then you want to send notifications, etc., it's going to be a problem. So that's where communication through services come in. So service in an Angular is a singleton where it's for each and every component, it's the same instance where you can access the service object. So the best way of communicating with handling that situation is you create an observable in a service, and then component B would send the message or whatever to that observable, and then another component would be listening to that observable, and then catching or subscribing to the data that is sent by the other component. So this way, sibling or the nth child parent communication is much easier and better. So this is the basic way, and there's an advanced where if you want to retain the state and everything, like in Redux, you can use ngrx2, which I believe is the next topic that's coming up. So I'm not gonna touch on it on this presentation. So as I said, it's a very simple presentation. So we are gonna go for a bit of a demo now. Okay. Does any of you have any questions on my presentation? Was it too short? I just spent about 2 hours last night preparing it. So yeah. All right, let's go for the demo. and I spent another 2 hours preparing this demo as well, so shows my commitment. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, what I'm gonna achieve here is this one. So in the initial one, parent child, what I would want to do is, if I type something in the parent input checkbox, on the child box, child component, that would be reflected. This is ideally like two-way binding. So second one is, if child wants to type something or send some value to the parent, then that also would be reflected on the parent component. And finally, if I want to press, there's a greetings alert or a functionality in child component which I want to invoke from parent. So if I press this button from parent, that child function should invoke hello ngsrilanka. So let's get to it. So here, this is the implemented code, and this is the non-implemented code where nothing happens. So we are gonna do this now, and hopefully my demo would work out, because I have bad experiences with live demos. All right. Okay, so if you look here, yeah, I have a component called parent child, and there I have something called a child A. I should have named it as child component rather than naming it child A, but it was late last night and I didn't bother to fix it. Okay. So if we look at parent component, we can see here that parent has a function. First, let's implement, if I type something on parent, that should get implemented, that should get reflected on the child component. To do that, now parent has an input where that input is binded to a text box value here, and I want to pass that value to my child, not my child, but rather the component's child. All right. Yeah. Okay, so this is the child component. So before I pass it to the child component, the child component should be ready to actually get receive that component. So to do that, I have to do, there's something called input. This is how we define that we get a value from the parent, or you get value injected. Apparently I have forgotten to comment that out, so it's over here. So text box value from parent, there's an input here, so that's it. And on child, I have just uh, binded it here in the child template. Okay, so all I have to do now is pass the value that is taken from this text box to the child. To do that, unfortunately I have done it, so I have forgotten to remove it. So this is the name of the property that I wrote as input. So I have binded with these braces, and then I have given the text box value, which is the model value here. So ideally, when I type here, it's working. All right, so the next one, so if I do a child input, the next step is, if I type something on the child input, that should actually reflect on the parent component. To do that, I have commented that code, so I can do a demo on that. So first thing we have to do is, we have the input, and it's binded to a model text box value, and then I have added another event called key up, where when I type something, the text box change function is executed on the component's logic. So here is something called text box change, which is on to do. So now, before doing this, first I have to actually create a emitter that is going to actually emit this value to the parent. So if it's going outside of the component, that's going to be at output, and then I'm gonna say text box value emitter, and then I'm gonna cast this to event emitter. This is gonna be a string, and then I'm gonna make this equal, and I'm gonna initialize that as a new event emitter. Okay. All right, so now that's done. All I have to do is, when something changes on the text box, I would emit the changed text to the parent. So to do that, I would just type this dot text box value emitter dot emit, and then I would pass in the value, which is this dot text box value. Okay, so now this will get emitted to the parent. So now parent has to actually, now when I type it, still not this one, I'm sorry, so still, even if I type it here, it doesn't actually reflect here, unfortunately. So that's because although I'm sending the data through my child, not my child, the parent is not yet receiving that. It doesn't have any functionality receiving it. Okay, so to do that, finally what you have to do is on parent, here we would just add, we would catch that output as an event here, which is of this name, and then I would execute the function. I have already written a function called update text box value from where it actually updates it. So I would use it, and then I would give $event. $event is actually what the message that is passed, or the data. So if I paste this, save this, it should work. So now the communication works. So I believe my time has run out. So if I have the completed code, so I will just quickly show you the rest. So the other one is Sibling. So I'll quickly skim through this. So in Siblings, what we have is, I have created a service called Sibling service, and then I have exported an interface called Sibling message, and there's a receiver string and a message string. And in the Sibling service, I have a subject, and it's initiated to subject, new subject. The subject and observable are taken through RxJS library, and I have two functions, set and get. So what set would do is, it would allow me to send messages, and whereas get would actually allow me to get this subject as an observer, so that relevant components could subscribe to whatever the messages that are being sent to that subject. So looking at the services, looking at the components, it's pretty easy. So if you want to send message, it's just gonna be, I have to import the Sibling service, and then I would just say send it to B, and the message would be whatever the message I typed. And when I'm receiving it, it's just a matter of getting the observer, and then I have done a pipe filter here, where I would just receive only the messages that are sent to this particular component, which is A, and then I would subscribe to that, and then I would update my messages. So that's how it all works out. If I show here, if I send any message here, I would say here, and then if this one person also say hello or something and send to A, it would look like that. Okay, with that I would conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.